Rain doesn't sound deadly. It is just water falling from the sky. You've stood in it 1,000 times and been fine. But in the ancient world, endless rain was one of the quietest killers there was. And it didn't kill the way you'd think. It wasn't the hunger, and it wasn't the flooding. It was something far simpler and far more merciless, being wet and cold at the same time, with no way to ever get dry. A soaked body in a cold wind loses heat many times faster than a dry one, fast enough to kill a strong, healthy human in a single miserable day. So when the rain set in and refused to stop, your ancestors weren't just uncomfortable. They were in a slow, silent fight for their lives. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand that surviving endless rain wasn't about being tough. It was about winning a whole series of desperate little battles, and most people today wouldn't survive a single week of them. Let's start with the enemy, because almost everyone gets it wrong. When you picture the danger of endless rain, you picture dramatic things. A raging flood, a landslide, a river bursting its banks. And yes, those could kill, but they were rare, and they were fast, and you could see them coming. The real killer in endless rain was none of those. It was invisible, it was constant, and it was working on you every single moment the rain fell. It was the simple, relentless loss of heat from a wet body. Here is why water is so dangerous, and it is pure physics. Your body is a furnace, always producing heat, always trying to hold itself at a safe temperature. Dry air is a decent insulator. It lets your warmth escape slowly, but water is a thief. Water pulls heat out of your body many times faster than air does. When your clothing and your skin are soaked, that wet layer becomes a highway for your body heat to escape, draining your warmth away far faster than you can produce it. Add a breath of cold wind on top of that wet skin, and the heat loss accelerates even more. This is the thing that kills people caught out in the rain even today, and it has a name: hypothermia. Your core temperature drops, and as it falls, your body starts to fail. You shiver uncontrollably. Then your thinking goes foggy. Your hands stop working, and if it goes far enough, you simply stop. Not from the rain, but from the cold the rain let in. The terrible part is how quiet it is. There is no dramatic moment, just a slow, creeping chill that steals your warmth, then your strength, then your mind, while the gray rain keeps falling like nothing is happening at all. Let me put you inside that slow death, because it is nothing like you'd expect. Imagine you've been out in it too long, soaked to the skin, and at first you're just cold and uncomfortable, annoyed, wanting to get dry, because everything is wet, so the cold keeps working. The shivering starts, hard and violent, your body burning through its energy trying to make heat. Then, strangely, after a while the shivering might stop, not because you're warming up, but because your body is running out of fuel to fight with. Your fingers have gone clumsy, you can't grip properly, can't tie a knot, can't do the very things that might save you. Your thoughts turn slow and thick, like your mind is wading through mud. You might even start to feel oddly calm, even warm, as your body's alarms begin to shut down. And that is the most dangerous moment of all, because it feels like relief when it is actually the end approaching. A person in that state, out in the endless rain, will simply lie down and never get up. No blood, no struggle, no sound. Just the cold and the rain and a warmth that was quietly draining away the whole time. This is what your ancestors were truly fighting. Every single hour the rain fell. So the number one rule of surviving endless rain, the thing everything else depended on, was brutally simple. Stay dry. Or at least keep part of yourself dry. Because a human who could not keep a dry, warm core through weeks of rain was a human who would not survive them. And that meant the first and most important thing was a roof. Shelter, real shelter, that actually kept the water off, was not a comfort in the rain. It was the difference between life and death. Our ancestors were masters at this, far beyond what we give them credit for. They didn't just huddle under a tree and hope. They sought out and improved real shelter, deep caves and rock overhangs that kept the rain off entirely, and where nature didn't provide, they built. They constructed shelters designed to shed water, angled roofs of hide and bark and woven branches, layered so the rain ran off and away instead of soaking through. They knew how to pick the high ground, so the water flowed away from where they slept instead of pooling beneath them. A well-built ancient shelter in the rain was a small defended island of dryness in a soaking world, and inside it, a human could keep the one thing that mattered most, a dry, warm body at the center of the storm. And really imagine that island from the inside, because it tells you how much skill went into it. Outside, the world is gray and drowned. Mud everywhere, water running in sheets, every surface soaked and cold. But step inside a well-made shelter, and the rain is suddenly above you and outside you instead of on you. The roof is angled and layered, so the water runs down and off and away, never dripping through. The floor is high enough, or trenched around, so the flowing water doesn't creep in to pool where people sleep. Maybe there is dry bedding lifted off the wet ground, and the fire's glow pushing warmth into the space. It is not luxury. It is cramped and smoky and close. But it is asterisk dry asterisk. And in that world, dry was everything. That small pocket of dryness was where the body could recover the heat the rain kept trying to steal, where soaked clothing could slowly dry by the fire, where a person could stop fighting the cold for a few hours and simply survive. Building and defending that dry island against a world of water was one of the most important skills a group possessed. The people who could make it lived. The people who couldn't didn't. And if this is already changing how you picture surviving the rain, if you're seeing it not as toughing out some bad weather but as a life or death fight to stay dry, then do me one favor. Tap that subscribe button right now. This channel is for people who want the real story of where we came from, not the cartoon version. The people who understand how much genius it took just to make it through a rainy week. You belong here. Now stay with me, because a roof over your head keeps the rain off, but it doesn't make you warm. And in a cold, wet world, you need warmth. Actively, or the chill still finds its way into you, which brings us to the hardest, most desperate problem in the entire fight to survive endless rain. Fire. Think about what fire meant to these people. Fire was everything. It was warmth to drive out the deadly chill. It was the only way to dry soaked clothing and skin. It was cooked food and safety and light. In the cold and the wet, fire was quite literally the thing standing between your ancestors and death by hypothermia. And now, picture trying to keep that fire alive in a world where everything, every log, the very ground itself, is soaked through, and the rain is falling from the sky actively trying to put it out. This was the nightmare at the heart of it all. The one thing they needed most to survive the rain was the one thing the rain was most determined to destroy. So how did they do it? Not by luck, by knowledge, and by relentless preparation. The first secret was that a wise group never let their fire go out in the first place, because starting a brand new fire from nothing with wet materials is nearly impossible. So they protected the flame they already had, like the treasure it was, sheltering it under overhangs, in the mouths of caves under built coverings, keeping it burning through the whole wet siege, feeding it carefully, never letting the rain reach it. A living fire, protected, was infinitely easier to keep alive than a dead one was to restart. It is the middle of a soaking night, and someone in the group is awake, crouched over the fire, because the fire cannot be left alone. The rain is hissing down just beyond the shelter's edge, and every gust threatens to blow damp air or spitting droplets onto the flames. So the firekeeper hunches over it, shielding it with their own body, feeding it small pieces of the precious dry wood one at a time, coaxing it, never letting it flare too high and waste fuel, never letting it sink too low and die. If a leak opens in the shelter above, and a trickle of water finds its way toward the coals, they move fast to block it, to shift the fire, to protect it. This was a job that never fully stopped through the whole wet siege, passed from one person to the next. Because that small circle of flame was the beating heart of the group's survival. Let it die, and you were plunged into cold and dark with no way to dry out, no way to cook, no way to drive back the hypothermia. So they guarded it like the living thing it almost was. In a soaking world, the person tending the fire was tending everyone's life at once. And they were geniuses about fuel. They understood that the outside of a soaked log is wet, but the inside is often still dry, so they could split wood open to reach the dry heart within, the part the rain had never touched. They knew which materials caught fire, even when damp, and most importantly, they planned ahead. They hoarded dry tinder and fuel asterisk before asterisk and asterisk during asterisk the rains, tucking away the driest wood, bark, and kindling in the driest corners of their shelter. A hidden reserve of dryness saved up for exactly this crisis. Think about the foresight in that, gathering and protecting dry fuel in anticipation of a soaking world, so that when everything outside was drenched, you still had the seed of a fire safe and dry inside. That single habit, never let the fire die, always keep dry fuel in reserve, is a huge part of how a soft, cold-blooded, to-the-bone human made it through weeks of rain alive. So now they had shelter, and they had fire, a dry core and a source of warmth. But the rain was patient, and it attacked on more than one front, because while they were fighting to stay warm and dry, the rain was quietly starving them. Because endless rain doesn't just soak you, it shuts down your food. This is where it becomes a siege. In heavy, unending rain, the whole business of finding food falls apart. The plants and roots and berries our ancestors gathered turned to rot, or washed away, or simply couldn't be found in the mud and the gray. And hunting became a nightmare. The rain washed away the scent trails they tracked by. It hid the animals, who were hunkered down out of the weather, just like the humans were. It made every surface slick and treacherous, turned rivers into dangerous torrents, and soaked the hunters to the bone the moment they left shelter, exposing them to the very hypothermia that was trying to kill them. So going out to hunt in endless rain wasn't just hard, it could be a death sentence in itself. The rain had cut off nearly every normal way of getting food, all at once. So what did they eat? The answer is that the smart ones had already prepared, long before the rain came. This is the deepest truth of surviving any long disaster. You don't survive it during. You survive it because of what you did before. The groups that lived through the endless rains were the groups that had stored food ahead of time. Dried meat, preserved supplies, reserves tucked away in their shelter against exactly this kind of siege. They had, in their memory and their habits, the knowledge that the rains would come and that when they did, the world would stop providing. So they filled their stores in the good times to survive the bad ones. And when even that ran low, they fell back on their vast knowledge of emergency foods, the things you could still find in a soaking world if you knew where to look, the last resort foods that could keep a person alive until the sky finally cleared. It was foresight and knowledge and preparation. The group that had spent the sunny weeks thinking ahead to the wet ones was the group that ate while the rain fell, and the group that hadn't went hungry in the dark. But even with shelter, fire, and food, the rain had one more set of weapons, and these were the quietest and strangest killers of all, because a constantly wet world is a world that breeds sickness. Think about what weeks of dampness does. Standing water pools everywhere, and standing water goes bad. It becomes a breeding ground for the invisible things that cause disease, and a thirsty human drinking dirty pooled water could be killed by something they never saw. Food left in the damp rots faster, turning a precious store into something that could sicken you. And the human body itself, kept wet for days and days, begins to break down. Skin that never dries out gets damaged and infected, a slow rot that could cripple a person's feet and hands and leave them unable to walk or work. These damp world sicknesses were a real and constant threat, and our ancestors fought them with hard-won wisdom, keeping their living space as dry as they could, being careful about the water they drank when they could manage it, doing everything possible to dry and protect their bodies during any break in the weather. In a soaking world, dryness wasn't just about comfort or warmth, it was medicine. And these damp world dangers were especially cruel because they were slow and invisible. Arriving after the worst of the rain had already worn the group down. A person could survive the cold, keep the fire lit, ration the food carefully, and then be brought low days later by something they drank, or by a wound that wouldn't heal in the endless damp, or by a sickness that spread through a group packed together in a cramped, humid shelter with no way to get clean. This is the hidden cruelty of a long, wet siege. Even after you've solved the obvious problems, the wet keeps working on you. Looking for a crack, it rots your food and your feet and your water and your health, patiently, from angles you can't see. Our ancestors couldn't name the invisible causes the way we can, but they had learned the patterns through generations of hard loss, that pooled water could sicken you, that a body kept wet too long would fail, that a damp shelter bred illness. And they acted on that knowledge without needing to know the why behind it, because the ones who didn't act on it simply weren't there anymore to pass their habits on. Every piece of that damp world wisdom was written in the losses of the people who came before. And then there was the last enemy, the one that attacked not the body but the mind. Because there is something about endless rain that wears a person down in a way that is hard to describe. Day after day of gray sky, the sound of rain that never stops. Trapped in a shelter, cold and damp, with no sun, no break, no way to know when it will end. Just the same relentless gray, hour after hour, day after day. That kind of unending gloom is its own kind of danger. It breeds despair, and a person who sinks into hopelessness stops doing the small, constant things that survival demands, stops tending the fire, stops caring for themselves. In a siege of endless rain, keeping your spirit alive was as important as keeping your fire alive. So how did they survive that? The same way humans have always survived the darkness, together, trapped in the shelter through the long wet days. They had each other. They told stories. They made and mended their tools. They kept their hands and their minds busy, and they held each other up. And above all, they knew, because their elders had lived it before, that the rain would end, that it always ended, that gray skies eventually break, And the sun always comes back. That knowledge, passed down from the ones who had survived it before, was a lifeline. It turned an unbearable, endless gray into something with a shape and an end. And a group that could keep its hope alive through the long rains was a group that would still be there, still tending its fire, still alive, when the clouds finally broke. And don't underestimate how heavy that gray could become. When you've never known a world without weather forecasts and electric light, it is hard to feel the weight of it. But imagine day after day with no sun at all, no way to dry anything, no way to know if the rain would break tomorrow or drag on for another 2 weeks. The light itself is dim and colorless. The sound of the rain never stops, hour after hour, until it seems to get inside your skull. You're trapped in a small, smoky, crowded space with the same faces, the same damp, the same gray square of light at the shelter's mouth. It is the kind of monotony that can hollow a person out. And in that state, the danger isn't dramatic. It is that a person slowly stops caring, stops helping tend the fire, stops eating properly, stops fighting to stay dry. And in a world where survival depended on doing all those small things relentlessly, giving up on them was, quietly, giving up on life. So keeping each other's spirits up wasn't soft or sentimental. It was survival strategy, as real as the fire and the food. A joke, a song, a story, a reminder that the sun always comes back. These were tools that kept people doing the things that kept them alive. So how did ancient humans survive endless rain? Not by being tough enough to shrug off being cold and wet. No human can do that. And the ones who tried, died. They survived by winning a whole series of quiet, desperate battles at once. They kept a dry, warm core with real shelter. They performed the near miracle of keeping fire alive in a soaking world through preparation and knowledge. They ate because they had stored food before the rains ever came. They fought off the invisible sicknesses of a damp world with hard-won wisdom about dryness and clean water. And they kept their spirits alive through the endless gray by holding together and trusting that the rain would break. Pull out any one of those, and the rain wins. Together, they were a system for outlasting a sky that would not stop, and every piece of it had to be known and prepared and remembered long before the first drop ever fell. And now, let's kill the myth, the one that pictures the ancient human as a miserable creature, just enduring the weather, shivering and helpless in the rain. The person who survived those endless rains was a planner, a builder, a firemaster, a keeper of stores, a healer, and the holder of a hope passed down across generations. They didn't endure the rain. They prepared it. They beat it before it began. With a lifetime of knowledge about how to stay dry and warm and fed and sane in a world doing everything it could to take all four away. So the next time the rain sets in and you're sitting inside, warm and completely dry, listening to it drum against a roof you never once worried about, stop for just a second and feel what that really is. A dry roof, a warm room, clean water, food in the kitchen. Every single one of those is an answer to a problem that nearly killed your ancestors. Over and over, across thousands of years of endless gray rain, they solved every one of those problems, the hard way, out in the cold and the wet, so that one day you could sit through a rainstorm and feel nothing but cozy. That comfort you take for granted is a victory, an ancient, hard-won victory, handed down all the way to you. But rain was only one face of the sky's cruelty, because the same world that could drown you in weeks of endless rain could also do the opposite, hold back the water for years, and crack the whole land into dust. So how did those same ancestors survive when the rain stopped completely, and a drought settled in that lasted not weeks, but years? That is the story we open next.